Okay, can everybody hear me? Yay. Good afternoon. Name is Nick Grandy. I'm the GM for Vocational and Industrial Services, based out of Zonar in the US. We are a subsidiary of Continental. So today we're going to start talking about data, and all the data specifically tied to construction sites, pits, and quarries. I like to let people know a little bit about myself before I talk. So I've got to get home for Halloween for my kids, and I have a dog, a little puppy that's waiting on me, as you can see. He stands at the door waiting. Not so small anymore, he's about 200 pounds. So a little bit about myself. I started off around data when I was 21 years old. It was as a Marion County Sheriff. I was actually an officer on the road, transitioned into the inside department where I ran digital communications and IT. At that point in time, data was not a big deal to a lot of people, especially in government. We started to find out it was. I was the first sheriff's department in the entire US to actually implement telematics into the fleet, which is unheard of. Even to this day, it's kind of not a good thing, right? Cops don't want to be tracked. But all the data that we started to collect was not just to make sure our officers were safe. It was to make sure that we knew about the fleet and how it was performing and if we had any issues. So it all had to do with safety at that time. After leaving there and implementing the telematics systems, I actually went into multiple startups. They were all telematics related, so all data driven, all creating ROIs for customers throughout different industries. As I transitioned, I went into Zonar. I'm going on 8 years now, I think. There, started off as sales engineer, moved my way up to the sales engineer manager. So that's where I kind of really honed what I did, which was being in front of a customer, knowing products really, really well, and also knowing what the customers do. So as we move on, so the concept here is smart fleets, right? Every fleet should be smart nowadays. We have kind of positioned ourselves, starting off with OEMs, because that's where the data essentially generates itself, right? And if you can get in with an OEM and get the smart data, as we like to say, it's going to help the end customer, which is our fleets that are small, large, and medium. Really, diagnostics, we're going to keep coming back to remote health, safety, things like that. So diagnostics with the OEMs, and we've got quite a few as we'll go through here, is the start of it, and that kind of drives all the data that we're looking for. Give you an idea, I'm not going to talk about all of the stuff we do, but as you can see, we like to go into data, right? So Fault IQ, it's diagnostics. We partner with Cummins, do over-the-air updates for the ECMs. Very heavy data-driven, especially on the Cummins side. Safety for us is cameras. So we like to actually help coach the operators if they're doing things they shouldn't do, like speeding, stop signs, things like that, right? So now we'll move on, so you kind of have an idea of what I do. So now that we're in the vocational fleets and the pits and quarries, our main focus, like I stated, is fleet health and safety. That's the first thing that we go after, right? That's going to drive everything we do with the amount of accidents that we've seen in the industry year over year, the amount of thefts that we actually see. So we're going to drive all the things we need for our customers through the data points. Now the other part of that is driver productivity and then operational efficiencies. All this is going to drive ROIs and KPIs for the customer. Some of the trusted ones that we've been with, and I don't know if anybody knows any of these over here. Most of these are in the US for me, but our large customers are Henkels McCoy, MYR, Smyrna Ready Mix, so anywhere from utilities to construction fleets to pits and quarries running Ready Mix. Some of the big partners we've spoken about is Freightliner, Penske, Cummins. Most of my customers over here have assets that are running this equipment. So since we got bought by Continental, I believe 5-6 years ago, I kept hearing a saying, and it was, if only our company knew all the things that we know. And it made a whole lot of sense to me, because a lot of the time we know a lot, we have a lot of data and a lot of information, we just don't always put it in the right hands of the right people. Sometimes you don't know about the data that you have. So part of what we want to do is change. When I walked into the vocational industry, it was everybody's a caveman writing a wall, right? They don't like data. This is the way they do operations. Used to believe it until recently. Now we've started to see up into the last 5 years, big companies, small companies, they are data-driven. If we think of this stage up here as a pit, a quarry, a construction site, every single one of these things up here are producing data. It all sits in the cloud, and there's a ton of data. So the issue that we had is we had this wall that we were writing on. All of the companies came together, right? And they started to go, hey, we need the data. So they broke the wall. It's amazing. Now all of a sudden they have all these ones and zeros and bits and bytes and data, and it's just so much. What do you do with it? I don't know where to start if I'm a customer. Part of that as well is the next step that helped them. All of the OEMs, if you're looking at the DTC codes, they were all different. There was no standardization, right? So if I'm trying to figure out the fleet health and I'm trying to figure out what I need to do, it was really hard to do that. So coming to play, 2012, we had the AMP. We now have AMP 2.0, the ISO standards that say there's certain codes that have to be similar, right? It means it's easier for the fleet maintenance and everybody to pull that data and know exactly what certain codes mean. Now, we all know they don't all do all the codes that are out there. They have a standardized set of codes that they have to supply, but there's thousands and thousands of data points. So it's just the beginning when it comes to the codes. So now we have the data. What do we do with it? As of recently, we've seen some studies, and it's kind of shocking. We still, in 2020, we had 48.8% manual when it came to data. 2021, 51.3% was still being done manually. So we have all this. We're writing things on paper. We might be doing Excel sheets, which I hate Excel sheets. So to me, that's very manual. So it just keeps coming back around to, we have data. What do we do with it? How do we make it actionable? Okay, so first thing is all the data. We need to make sense of all the data that we have. If there's 100 pieces of data, maybe we don't need all of the data. We need to really pinpoint what is specific to the customer and the corporation that they're looking for. Once we do that, we've got to put the data in the right hands. So what we've done with SiteIQ is we pull data points from everything. And for each one of these things, if you guys look up here, we have different tools. And every single one of these tools means it's a new web page for you to go to. So if I'm a fleet supervisor, if I'm an area production manager, I need to log in and do a new web page every time I want to see something. I'm not going to do it because I don't have enough time to do it. It's not my job. I've got to be productive. So we want to pull it all and make it into one screen to see the data that's actionable for me. So we'll go ahead and take a few examples of who's this important to, say specifically in a pit, quarry, construction site. I think it's actionable data for everybody, but we have an area production manager. So what are they looking at? What is their job? A, they need to meet quota. They need to increase what we could consider cost per ton. And they're not only looking at one site, they may be looking at multiple sites. So how do they pay attention to that when they've got to be in the pit and working? They have a screen that's one screen for them that's customizable based off of what they're asking for, not what I am or what Bob, the fleet foreman, is. So being able to know, for me, cost per ton, my cycle times, my loads, my dumps, my tallies. Am I utilizing my assets? Am I idling way too much, which we all know, especially in these sites, if you're not moving, you're not making money. So we have to watch the idles. We need to figure out if we're bunching. These are all data points that we set up for the customer individually based off their roles. Next one we're going to look at, site forewomen. They're looking at a little different stuff, right? So they have quotas that they have to meet, essentially. They need to be efficient. So we're going to come back to some of those idles, but more specifically, if I've got 25 sites and I'm looking at idles, I need to break it down by what areas inside of the pits that are idling, where I'm actually having issues with my cycle times. Depending on what kind of things that I'm digging for that day, my cycle times could be different, just on the variance of distance. Next one, and I love engineers. I'm not an engineer, thankfully. It's too much data for me, but they dig into the data. And the whole point of them coming in to dig into the data is to become more efficient. We have a lot, at least for me, when we're seeing on sites with these companies. They actually have students come in from college, they spend the summer, and they sit and analyze every piece of data that's coming off all these equipments, okay? So the idea is we actually give them the things that they need to know. We'll take the actual drone footage that's done once every 2-3 months. We overlay it with cycle times, and the cycle times are color-coded. So if a customer says it's 9 minutes is a good cycle time, 21 minutes is horrible, we put them in the areas where they're actually happening so they can start to readjust maybe the dump sites that they're actually putting it on, the actual conveyor belts, whatever the case may be, but they have the data to do what they need to do differently. Equipment manager. So they're not so worried about the actual pit, they're just worried about the actual fleet itself. Once again, a lot of data. We have DTC codes. If you know anything about Zonar, you know we have an inspection tool. It's EVER. It's CVI over here in Europe. It means I no longer have to write on a piece of paper and literally sit in my seat in my vehicle and just check a box that I went and did my pre-trip and my post-trip around the vehicle. But it monitors that, and that information has an API to it. So it pulls it into the system because it's an API, and we set it in a bucket. DTC codes coming off the engine. We put that in a bucket and score it. If you've got PSCs, you have any other types of inspections, all of this information is set in a bucket. On top of that, it is weighted for the customer. So for me personally, inspections are big, engine codes are big. I'm going to weight those 10 out of 10. All that means really visible for me. Red is bad, orange is getting bad, green's good. The idea is we don't want you to get to this because this red could mean a site shutting down, which is very costly. Not only that, but the actual asset could be costly. If I can stop it here for $500 US to go out and fix it, do an oil filter change, whatever the case is, versus coming up here and having to replace an engine at $50,000, it's going to make my life a whole lot easier. So we're supplying all of this data for them as well, and that's just on the fleet side. High up, the higher you get, the more you want to look at trend analysis, the more you want to look at not just one site, but in the US, a customer has 359 sites. So I don't care about day-to-day, every single little site and what's going on. I want to know overall how are we doing with our ROIs, how are we producing, how's our CPT across the board, et cetera. So we really customize towards each individual user, and it's at a glance of a screen instead of I need to sit here and go through 25 reports to look into it. So for me, we've kind of talked about cycle times, we've talked about ROI, KPIs, and where things go. I know a cycle time for most people, if you don't know, is a loader will dump material in a hauler, the hauler rolls up to the actual crusher, dumps the material, comes back to a loader. That's considered a cycle time in a pit. The end game for me when it comes to cycle times is digging the hole in the ground all the way through the process of laying the road. Because all that is connected in some way, shape, or form, and there's data points everywhere, whether it's over-the-road trucks, transporting the material, whether it's more off-highway, laying and digging the roads, all the way to the paving at the end of the day. So the end goal for us is making sure that everything is connected and it's visible in one screen for the people who need to know it. And hopefully, I think I'm good. Any questions? Okay. Thank you.